Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. So today what I'd like to get to is I'd love to talk about frozen shoulders. Now a frozen shoulder, or adhesive capsulitis, which it's known as in the industry, it sucks. It's something that if you've got it and you've found your way to this video because you're looking for some answers, you'll know very, very well that it's quite a frustrating issue to have. And that's generally for two reasons. The first reason is that it often tends to come out of nowhere, where you weren't necessarily doing something and then you fell and hurt yourself and you have the problem. It's something that just gradually comes into your life, becomes worse, and then you're just stuck with it for a long period of time. The second reason why it's a frustrating condition is that it can hang around for a long period of time. What we generally suggest is that a frozen shoulder, at least when I first started as a physical therapist, this idea that once you've got it, you almost have to wait it out until your body's sort of rights itself. And for some people, that can be 12 months, it can be 2 years potentially. And to tell someone that they have a problem for 2 years and they're not necessarily going to find that relief is quite challenging for that person. So if you are one of those people, let us know in the comments below. It's something that can be quite mentally challenging as well as physically challenging, because the pain can be quite significant and it can just hang around for a long time, which is something that just sucks, plain and simply. So hopefully in today's video, what I can get across is I would love to just do a quick rundown of what frozen shoulder is, because for some reason I don't think a lot of people, particularly who have it, but just in general, the perception of what it is, I think we're sort of missing the point a little bit. The second thing is I sort of want to talk about why it happens. So what it is and why it happens, I think, are really important to understand, because if we're trying to fix this and stop it from coming back again, we need to understand both what it is and what's brought it to that point. And the third thing is I just want to touch on one exercise that I find really, really useful to combat a frozen shoulder. It's probably something that you haven't seen before unless you've seen some of these videos before. It's completely different to the standard approach of just doing the stick exercises and forcing your arm into a better position. It's much more enjoyable to do. It's potentially a lot more sort of faster acting than anything that you may have tried before. So please hang around to the end of the video and we'll go through that together. So I guess the first thing that I wanted to touch on with this is what a frozen shoulder is. And it's a pretty ugly term. It can be a daunting thing to be given that label of. But essentially all a frozen shoulder is inflammation and stiffening of the shoulder capsule. And what a shoulder capsule is if you can picture your shoulder joint as a ball and socket joint. You've got the head of your arm as it attaches to the cup of your shoulder blade as it sits on the side here. What your body has is not just because it's a ball and socket joint, but most joints in the body are wrapped up in a really thick, tough connective tissue called a capsule. So it's just like putting your shoulder joint in your shirt and just bunching that up, and that's essentially what the capsule is like. And what happens is that capsule becomes inflamed, becomes irritated and sore, and it becomes stiff. So instead of having this full range of motion to use at your discretion at the shoulder, all of a sudden we get this clamp where your sort of shoulder range of motion is severely limited, and it can jam up and cause you pain as you get to the limits of that range. Now, as we said, it can be very, very painful and it can hang around, because traditionally we're sort of waiting for something to change to hope that it gets better. But to understand what you need to do to navigate this minefield a lot faster and a lot more successfully, we need to talk about why it happens. So I guess if you look at the literature, if you speak to a lot of physical therapists, if you look on the internet, a lot of people say that it happens insidiously or it happens spontaneously without reason. But what we find clinically is it's not necessarily the case, because for that capsule to become stiff and irritated, it has to sort of get to a point where it's had enough and then tips over into that phase. And I guess this probably isn't a sexy conversation, but the single biggest reason why that I see people have a shoulder capsular problem or adhesive capsulitis or a frozen shoulder is that shoulder's constantly in a bad shape. So what we see with the shoulder capsule is in a good position, where your shoulders are back and and your upper back's in a good position, it's not too rounded. That shoulder joint is supported by the muscles of your shoulder, and all the connective tissue and soft tissue that's supposed to hold it in a good place does. Now the problem is if we get sucked into a position where we're slouching, whether that's always on the mouse or using a computer, or if you're playing an instrument, doing some arts and crafts, or you're just sitting down driving for a while or watching TV, if you're in that sort of rounded, slouchy shoulder shape, the constant weight of the arm pulling against gravity or with gravity basically tensions up all the tissue. So if I'm pulling down from here, then all the tissue that connects my shoulder to the shoulder blade, or my arm to the shoulder blade, sorry, even all the tissue that connects my shoulder to my back and upper neck, that's consistently under tension all the time. And it's not necessarily a significant enough of a threat in that moment to cause an instant problem. But over a long period of time, all your body is being asked to do is adapt to that shape. So the extra tension means that it has to get tighter and stiffer to buffer that position. And what we often forget is that the arm, as it just drops and hangs there, we're basically hanging off the passive tension of that shoulder capsule, particularly at the back of the shoulder. And over time, it becomes stiffer. And if that tissue becomes stiffer and tighter and stiffer and tighter and overloaded, and it reaches that threshold, like any tissue in the body, it can become irritated and sore. So I guess to answer the question of why or what causes a shoulder capsulitis or a frozen shoulder, it's not that interesting, but the underlying cause is poor positioning, which overloads that tissue to the point where it breaches that threshold, tips over into being a problem. Now, one of the other things that's worth mentioning is a lot of people that do develop a frozen shoulder or an adhesive capsulitis, there can often be a lot of stress, whether that be past stress or significant stress or trauma, or constant current day stress, which is consistently increasing, I guess, the nervous system and its ability to, to buffer that dysfunction. So if you are, I guess an example is if you are a dog that's consistently barking at the front fence, or you're the dog that's asleep and relaxed, if you have a bad posture or some bad technique, the dog that's barking at the front fence is more likely going to experience pain and an incident faster or sooner, because it's already heightened. So it's already threatened. The entire threat level of the body is raised. So the threshold for dysfunction is lowered, and you get there faster. So just a quick piece on that. It's important that if you do suffer from a frozen shoulder and you feel like your pain is quite significant, it's important to take a step back and assess how stressed you are, how fearful of things you might be, whether you feel really frustrated about something, if you've had some significant trauma in the past or going through something quite challenging at the moment. Those sorts of things can sort of mesh in with this shoulder dysfunction, turning it into something more significant. So we can't neglect the fact that it can be, in a lot of cases, more than just a mechanical shoulder problem. There can also be some psychosocial, environmental things that are laid on top of that, making it worse. And there's things that you can do to address that. So I guess the two main takeaways from this to begin with are that adhesive capsulitis is a capsular issue that's often brought on by poor shapes, poor postures over time. Those tissues just cope until they can't. So the point of saying that is that if we're not then getting you to try and address those positions and be more aware of being in a better posture, then this is just going to be perpetuated for longer and longer, and it's going to be harder for you to quickly get yourself out of that and get to a better place. So because you can be doing all the exercises, all the rehab, all the physical therapy, inclusive of the stretch that we're about to get to, but if you're then putting your body back into a bad position again and overloading that tissue, it's hard to make significant gains because you're always going to be pulling it back down to the position that it was in or the state that it was in, and you're not going to have that sort of consistently clear run at getting it better. So if you have a frozen shoulder and you haven't been educated on what a good posture feels like, or you haven't developed the awareness to tell whether you're in a good posture or not for the entire day, essentially, you've got to work hard on that because it's a crucial piece of why it happens and why it doesn't go away as quickly as possible, because the habit that got you to that point has to change or has to improve, at least for the time that you're trying to get it better. And hopefully that habit stays on forever, but if you regress a little bit, you're not going to have the consequences attached to it. So there are two things to take away from, I guess, frozen shoulders. Now, I think more importantly, we want to give you an exercise that you feel actually does something. One of the problems that I see consistently with a lot of rehab programs and a lot of exercises that you'll see on the internet, and maybe some of the advice that you'll get from the industry, is that we tend to focus on exercises that don't get to the root cause or the root problems associated with a frozen shoulder. So if we know that the shoulder joint capsule has become stiff and tight, a lot of the broader exercises, like the stick exercises where you grab a stick and you sort of force that shoulder to bend more, a lot of the pressure and a lot of the force is coming from away from the shoulder. So you're not necessarily getting a specific loading or a specific action at the shoulder joint and through that tissue, and you're more likely to jam up that tissue as opposed to help it free up. And I think one of the things that we can do really well as physical therapists is we can get into that shoulder joint when you come in to see us and mobilize that tissue specifically to make it more malleable, and then hopefully you'll see some range of motion gains, some decreases in pain immediately after that treatment. But for the purpose of this video, we want to make sure that you have the confidence and the capabilities to do something significant at home, because you might have an hour of physical therapy with us, but there's still another 15 or 16 waking hours that day, and then multiple days throughout the week where you may not have hands-on therapy. So if you're consistently chipping away at this range of motion, then you're going to make those consistent gains, and your rehab's going to be condensed into weeks to months, and not necessarily months to years, which is far too common with frozen shoulder. So again, to reiterate, the exercise we want to address, or we want to go through, addresses shoulder capsular stiffness, not necessarily the muscular tightness around it or the joint stiffness through your neck and back that can be associated with it. We're trying to target something that specifically frees up the joint capsule. So this is what it is. So it's a very simple exercise. Now, again, we've done this on the channel before, and I'll try and link it to the top here with the eye if you want to look at it specifically. It wasn't in context of a frozen shoulder, but it's still, I guess, a rehash of this exercise. So basically what we're trying to do here is we want to get you onto your hands and knees. Now, if we remember that the majority of the capsular tightness tends to happen at the back because of those rounded shoulder positions. So we want to put your shoulder in a position that biases the back of that shoulder without jamming up the front and irritating your symptoms. So we need to find a position that feels completely safe and completely comfortable. Otherwise it becomes counterproductive. It's just not good enough to make you feel sore. This should be a really beneficial exercise. So how we want you to do this is we want to make sure that your back is nice and straight. So we don't want you too rounded or too dippy through your spine. But we also want your shoulder blades back. So we don't want you in this sort of rounded shoulder position. We want the shoulder blades back as best as you can. And the other thing we want to get you to do is, with the pit of your elbow, we don't want that to be facing across or your elbow facing outwards. We actually want you to rotate your elbows so the back of your elbow is facing behind you and the front, the pit of your elbow is facing forward. And if you can see, what happens here is when I'm in a good spinal position and a good shoulder blade position, if I rotate my elbows forwards, the tissue in the shoulder really winds up into a stable position. We want to do that because we want to find that safe capsular position to do the stretch. Now, all the stretch is keeping everything together, keeping your back and chest parallel to the ground. We're just shifting your entire body weight across over the hand that you're working on. Now, it's not a twist, it's just literally a shift across. And what you can do here is you can move over the top of your hand or away from your hand just to bias different parts of the shoulder. So we want to make sure that you find a pressure spot at the back here, and imagine that that arm is pushing out the back of your shoulder, the back corner of your shoulder. So if you're doing this and you feel like it's jamming up here, then just come off that position a little bit. So introduce a little bit more flexion if you have it. Don't go as far into the stretch, and try and find a position that you feel gives you some great pressure here, but nothing at the front, nothing jams up. And if you feel like that works for you, that's great. What we can do to make this even more specific is we can take the elbow out of it and just drop down into onto your elbow. So same thing again, back straight, shoulder blades back as best as you can, and then just shifting across and up or down depending on where you feel the best expression of that tightness is. Now, you don't have to do this on the floor. Obviously, it can get quite awkward, as that position probably showed, but it's great to do on a tabletop, on a bench. You can do it on a soft surface, but the point is that you're in a position and you shift across to that side, and you can bring it up or down depending on where it feels comfortable. And you want to hang out there for 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes, obsess over it throughout the day. As long as you're not irritating anything more towards the front and you're always feeling pressure and tension at the back, it's a brilliant exercise. The reason why it's a brilliant exercise, and I probably should have done this to start with, but when you check out your range of motion, what should happen immediately is if you're someone who gets stuck down here and you can't do that without starting to cheat because your shoulder hurts and it's stiff, you should immediately feel like you've got more range of motion to explore that range. So if you start here, you should find that hopefully it gets up to here or further depending on how well you did it. But for me purposely, with my right arm gets back to here, and having done this stretch on my left, what you should hopefully find is that it goes back further straight away. So I don't know if you can see that with me there, but my arm goes further back. So I'd urge you to test out your range first, whether that's that rotation that gets stuck or the out to the side that gets stuck for a lot of people. Test it out first, do that shoulder stretch, retest it again so you know it's done something good for you, because it's one of the best exercises that I've seen as a therapist. I use it for my patients because it's a really fast acting way to get into that tough, stiffened joint capsule and free it up without irritating it, which we can sometimes do if we're trying to force those broader stick exercises and other things like that. So hopefully that was useful. Please let me know in the comments below if you've tried it and how it felt. It can be a little bit technical to get, so if you have any problems, definitely ask in the comments, let us know. And while you're there, if you wouldn't mind leaving a like on the video and also consider subscribing if you are new. The way that YouTube works is that the more of those interactions and the more support we can get for each video, the more likely these ideas and these videos are to reach more people. So in the spirit of trying to spread the word, if you could do those things, that would be fantastic. I would really appreciate that. So again, hopefully that helps. If you have a frozen shoulder, hopefully that's a little bit more perspective to help sort of navigate you through that minefield and get you closer to where you want to be. So until next time, thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon.